There's no doubt that in the beginning, the Jewish people, the Greeks, and many others believed that Jesus was to be king of the Jews, that he was to restore the ancient throne of David, that he was to be a free king over a free people. This situation continued, is referred to in the Gospels, and seemingly contributed to some controversy among the apostles themselves. Jesus, however, pointing out that his kingdom was not of this world, his thought, his conviction in this matter was not fully understood or shared by those around him. It became something for the mystic rather than for the merely literal worshiper. That the old Jewish thinkers did tie the idea of the three wise men with the three sons of Noah is in itself rather suggestive and typical. In other words, in large, the three wise men represent humanity. They represent three major divisions of mankind. They bring to the infant child the symbol of worldly wealth, which is, of course, the symbol of gold. The symbol of spiritual power, which is associated with both frankincense and myrrh. And finally, the symbol of martyrdom as the supreme crown, or the symbol of achievement of supremacy through the final act of human unselfishness, usually anciently represented as myrrh. These gifts brought were therefore the world bestowing upon the child its destiny, bestowing upon the child its purpose in life, and the full meaning of its ministry. Now, if these three figures be represented as of different ages, they can also represent the degrees of racial or national developments. They represent perhaps also the three stages in life in which men should come or bring their problem to the feet of the Messiah. The idea being not only that all races, but all ages and all times should pay homage. Certainly this was the most orthodox and natural interpretation of the idea. But it goes from this point on into perhaps even more abstract and mystical dimension. If man himself, if the world itself, if the universe as a structure are all some way represented by these three wise men, then we have also them as symbols of knowledge, of arts and of sciences, of trades and of crafts, and of all forms of human achievement and activity. Not only those near but far away, not only those near of belief, but of other beliefs, paying universal homage. The whole concept rested in the idea, at least at one time, that the whole world was to recognize the sovereignty of its newborn king, that this was indeed to be a king without a crown, who should someday rule all men from their hearts, and that his eternal estate should be his kingdom of love. Going still further into this problem, we can observe that the use of a trinity immediately opens a tremendous area of philosophical and symbolical meaning. The use of the Trinity suggests all the triads with which we are familiar in religious symbolism. And almost every one of these triads can be fitted into the story in one way or another, so that various degrees or parts of man's nature may also be represented, that the sovereign creative processes of life can be represented, that the basic values of human consciousness can also be likened to these kings. In one way or another, therefore, they represent a total homage, the bringing of everything, of all things, the bringing of the public life and the private life, the great and the lowly, the rich and the poor, the near and the far, all together into this one great recognition. We know, of course, that in the early times that the use of the sun as a solar symbol of authority was recognized, and that it does occur in connection with the early Christian symbol. The sun as the symbol of the greater light, of the total illumination of the world, was always a messianic device. And to the sun and to the adoration of the solar principle came all the forms of life that are dependent upon the sun. Thus, as we recognize today, fortuitously enough, three general kingdoms in nature, we may assume that these wise men represented all the kingdoms of life, offering allegiance to the sovereignty of the solar power. Also, in a mysterious way, all the kingdoms of life acknowledging the law of the sun, acknowledging obedience to the great mystery of the solar power. Here we have something that begins to get down to a little more practical level of thinking. Here we begin to see the possibilities of more or less immediate application within the spheres of our own understandings. We therefore can observe perhaps that which the ancients themselves generally taught, namely that all living things owe obedience to the laws of the sun. That in the sun we have not only a source of visible light, but that behind the visible sun is an invisible source of spiritual light, which is good, truth, wisdom, and love. Therefore, that behind all the visible laws of nature is the great invisible love, by which nature is sustained, by which all creatures come to the fullness of their purposes, and that before the sovereignty of universal law, every knee must bend, and all must declare that this is the supreme glory. Thus the sun to the ancients became not only the symbol of life and of light, but as in the ancient Kabbalah, Ein Sofer, the symbol of truth, the symbol of reality, the symbol of the thing as it is, the symbol of being, of essence, the symbol of total, unconditioned factuality in its highest and most complete sense. Thus, in a sense, the worship of the three kings signifies man's final acceptance of the power of the universal principle as authority over all kingdoms of the earth and over all the works of men. This acceptance, unfortunately, is a little late, even in our own time. Even today, we have not accepted the sovereignty of the divine in the life of man. We have not recognized that over all kingdoms and all laws is the absolute suzerainty of truth itself. That actually God is truth. God is life and light and truth. And that before truth, all men must bend in allegiance. For to defy truth is to destroy self. To defy truth is to burden the world with misery and sorrow and death. To break the great laws is to bring upon ourselves the penalties of corruption and confusion. So all the world, with all its authorities, all its powers, all its prestiges and its privileges, must bow before the actual light of truth. Each person in his own heart has the same problem. Years ago, a very ingenious and interesting group of symbolism was developed, bearing upon the use of the human body as an element in the preparation of sacred books. There is much to support this idea. For instance, in the Vedas and the Puranas of India, the creation of the universe is actually merely a glorification of the creation of man. In other words, the prenatal epoch in man is enlarged and made more grand and is called the conception of the universe. In the same way, the various elements known in human experience and in human nature are regarded as the shadows or miniatures, the microcosms of the great processes occurring in the universe. By this particular type of symbolism, we have a very interesting thought. The town of Bethlehem, Bethlehem, actually means the house of bread. And it is quite possible that the old symbolists and Kabbalists intended this, as it seemed to be, to represent the interior digestive structure of man. The house of bread was therefore the stomach, the symbol of worldly security, because in ancient times the man with food was considered to be the man who was safe. But in this town where Jesus was born, there was no room for him in the inn. He was not therefore born in the house of bread, but in a stable. And this stable, according to this old symbolism, represented the heart, which was near to the inn, or near to the digestive center. But in those days, men's hearts, perhaps, were not held to be as vitally inspired as their stomachs. And therefore, it was not to be born in the symbol of physical success or prosperity, but to be born in the neglected place of the heart, the place where the true treasure must be, where we must store up our treasures not on earth, but in the heavenly part, or in the heart, which was placed upon the diaphragm muscle, or was the high place of the Lord. The human body can be analyzed with great care in the study of this, and most ancient peoples did make use of it, including the Yoga, Vedanta philosophies, and many others. So here we perhaps have something to do with the internal structure of man, and the symbol of the final place of worship, which is the heart, which is the little closet, where man must go in and pray to his Father in secret, and the Father who heareth in secret will reward him outwardly. This mystery, therefore, of the internal birth of the Savior in man reminds us, of course, of the admonition of St. Paul, the Christ in you, the hope of glory. Now, if this Christ is in us, the ancient mystics and the early Christian mystics held that this mystery meant that if God dwelt in man, he dwelt in the most mysterious and beautiful part of man, that part of man which was the highest, most vital and noble part. The ancients recognized the heart to be the source of life, for if it failed to function, then the person no longer lived. So as the source of life, the heart was held to have within it locked the greatest secret of man's consciousness, man's life. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. The heart, therefore, being in a sense the manger, surrounded by the animals representing the bodily or animal instincts of the human being, we find the divine principle of man being established in the midst of his animal propensities. We find these animal propensities represented by the beasts of the fields. They are the same beasts that were offered up upon the altar of burnt offering in the tabernacle in the wilderness, for it is quite certain that these people did not actually believe that the offering up of some animal would actually ensure their salvation. It was a symbol of the offering up of their own selfishness, of their own worldliness, of their own bodiliness, in the service and ministry of that consciousness which is the inner part of man. So it could be quite mystically proper to signify the birth of Jesus as actually the birth of the Christ consciousness in man. That Bethlehem and the whole of the geography of this region therefore suggests that man's own nature or his own body is the Holy Land. Even as in another mysticism, in another allegory, the Holy Sepulchre becomes the symbol of man's body. Plato used it much earlier, where he declared the sepulchre to be the body to be the sepulchre of the soul. This also explains the story of the Templars and the guarding of the roads of pilgrimage, a man's journey to the Holy Sepulchre, and his effort to wrest it from the keeping of the infidel, which meant no more nor less than the redeeming of man's bodily nature from its imprisonment by appetite, animal instinct, desire, selfishness, ignorance, and fear. These allegories seemingly have the quality that St. Paul is most celebrated for, the quality of universalizing a belief, the quality of taking time and place factors out of it, so that the mystery becomes eternal, and that this mystery is repeated continuously in the life of man. And I think this is also one of the great secrets of Christmas, is that it is a perpetual mystery in man, and not merely the celebration of an historical event that occurred at some remote time. It is the nowness of it, the eternal newness of it, as man his own conscious realizations grow and unfold. And so to the manger, to the inner life born in man, come the three wise men, who have in a way become now kings, who were at some distant time long ago baptized into the true faith, that went forth again and held a certain inner insight, even though it was in time lost, and whose remains might truly not only be buried within the sanctified shrine of Cologne, but in every foot of sanctified ground. For the three kings, to at least many mystical medievalists, simply represented the three primary attributes of man's own nature, attributes which were brought to the feet of Christ, or to the feet of truth born in us, and brought their gifts or offerings of their powers and potentials, that we might all share, so to say, in this restoration of ultimate good. Now, in ancient times, men took holy oath or obligation, and in this obligation they dedicated themselves to some purpose. And in the obligations of the ancient mystery rites and rituals, man dedicated his mind, his heart, and his hand to the service of God. He took this obligation that his mind would think only in terms of that which served God, that his emotions would feel principally and continuously the emotions of good, of love, of veneration, affection, and regard, and that his hand, like that of the old Essenian masters, would be dedicated to building for the glory of God. Out of the mind, the heart, and the hand certainly came the great divisions that we have today. Out of the mind came philosophy and science and reason and all the exact thoughts of men. Out of emotion, the heart, came religion, the arts, the great creative ideals of beauty, which we are still so indebted to. And out of the hand came the skills to accomplish all things necessary, to make cities safe for those who live in them, to defend the principles that we believe, to create and to reveal objectively these beauties that are locked within us. For without the skill of the body, the works of the heart and mind are not complete or perfect. So the three wise men are the wise bodies that were wise enough to offer themselves to the service of the supreme principle in man. The mind dedicated to consciousness, the heart dedicated to consciousness, the hand dedicated to consciousness. These bring their offerings, the mind bringing the offerings of its mental powers, the heart bringing the offering of its graces and its kindliness, the hand bringing the works which it has accomplished, the building, the structure, the things that it does, all like three master craftsmen, united in absolute dedication to the service of good. These master craftsmen are the great kings of the world, for they are the ones that make possible the growth of all things. But each of itself and in itself can be a tyrant. Each one can go its own way, bringing misery, darkness, and death in its way. The only answer is that all of these skills, all of these powers, all of these faculties, and all of these attributes must be dedicated. They must be brought into the service of principle. They must be dedicated to the service of truth. When this is accomplished, then we can build a better world. Then we can go forth again and redeem that which has been lost. We can then really begin to understand the problem of the perpetual mystery of consciousness. For just as at the Last Supper, the blood and the body of the Lord was given to the apostles, that they might partake thereof, as in the great Dionysiac myth of Greece, so that actually man lived off of these principles and these powers. The life in us is the blood of life, the blood of the eternal power. The nature around us with all its forms is the bread of life, which is the body of this power. And where we live from nature and from life, we live in a perpetual communion. Therefore, everything that sustains us because of the God in it. And by this sustaining helps us to perfect the God in us. This intimate mystical interpretation seems to lift us away from the confusion and uncertainty of legends into a great spiritual fact. A spiritual fact which perhaps some of our ancient peoples realize better than we know. Certainly they kept a beautiful symbolism which gives us the essential meaning. They have preserved it for us, and they reenact the simple drama each year, when the world with all its greatness, its pomp and circumstance, brings its offering to the manger of the newborn King, and where each individual in the Christmas season and in the Christmas mystery is moved to rededicate his own heart, his own mind, and his own hand to the service of truth, and to use these instruments as the means of his great journey, his journey from ignorance to wisdom, his journey from hate to love, his journey from darkness to light. This journey is across an unknown land. We do not know how many made the journey, whether they were carried on camels or elephants, or what they were carried on. But it is quite possible that these animals also symbolically represent the attributes of man's nature, and that these attributes become the means by which man, following the star of his own hope, following the star of his own inspiration, seeks for the faith, seeks for the truth, seeks for the strength and courage which he must have in order to live well in this uncertain world. And out of this type of thinking and this direction of thinking, our Christmas story of the three wise men takes on firm meaning, firm purpose, and becomes an ever-inspiring source of comfort and consolation, and a continual challenge to us to continue to seek until we too find that union with the within, which is the beginning of a true eternal life, a life in consciousness and reality. Time is up. And may I wish you all a very, very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and that the wise men will truly not only come to you, but the wise men in you will be again on their journey to search for the face of the Master in the little crib at Bethlehem, or wherever it took place, for it must take place in us. And regardless of history, it must be the Christ in us, which is to be the hope of glory. It is the truth in us, which we must serve completely, that is the only solution to the problems that we face. And thank you all very much.